For my contemporary artist, I've chosen to focus on Johan Barrios, who's a Colombian artist based in Houston, Texas. One of the things I like most about his art is he primarily works with charcoal on paper, adding some details in watercolor, both of which happen to be my favorite mediums both to use and consume. I've always been a huge fan of the visual effect of charcoal, and I feel that his art, which is largely comprised of black and white pieces, is a perfect demonstration of the potential contained in a material that at first can seem quite limited. His work is characterized by dynamic, often full body portraits of people in visually interesting poses and positions. They have an air of classical 19th century portraits, with Barrios' attention to composition and his pieces a moody, emotional atmosphere, echoing similar effects by 1800s painters like Alfred George Stevens, Vladimir Borovikovsky, and Rembrandt. His subjects, however, are distinctly modern, with their clothing, hairstyles, and jewelry giving away their era. While at once showing reverence for established art practices developed over centuries, the contemporary artist also pays these traditions homage with a fresh, decidedly unique twist. In Barrios' work, the individuals are pictured in much more active positions than the earlier models of his predecessors. Moreover, perhaps my favorite quality of the portraits, they often have an air of intimacy about them, frequently showing two people in some kind of close embrace. These poses have an almost yoga-like fluidity to them, yet still give the impression of being very organic and unforced. Instead, the subjects melt into one another with a natural ease that adds to the closeness that seems to radiate outward from them. Even in his solo portraits, the artist manages to maintain this intimate impression. In these cases, the source of his intimacy fluctuates depending on the piece and what it contains. At times, it's felt between the subject and the viewer, in others, between the subject and an object, and in others, still between the subject and themselves, all of which I think is achieved by Barrios' choice of positioning, which typically involves an enveloping like pose. Whether the individual is embracing themselves or, say, a chair, each position retains this quality that borders on affection and lends it an emotional weight that simply can't be achieved by the stoic orientation of models in the early archival paintings we talked about before. Even amongst modern artists, however, this almost sensual emotional intensity and the vulnerability that it awards each piece is a quality that is markedly unique to Barrios' work and powerfully sets his drawings apart from other portraits of their time. I've noticed on his social media he tends to thank his models for posing for the pieces, which initially made me wonder whether he shoots his own reference photos and works from those, or if he draws from life. After some researching, though, I learned that he develops his own ideas for the poses, usually sketching these out first, photographs his models accordingly, and then creates his drawings based on these images. He's mentioned in interviews, however, that it's not uncommon for the poses he ultimately uses to come up naturally with the models during the shooting process, which I think is a wonderfully organic quality which definitely translates to his finished pieces. In addition to the unique intimacy of his work, I think I feel most drawn to the black and white, charcoal heavy style he's been working in for the past couple of years because of charcoal's incomparable personality as a medium. I found that its capacity to be simultaneously gritty and soft is a power that lends intimate work like Barrios a success that can't quite be replicated by any other material. In addition to the visceral surface texture of charcoal pieces, its fine grained black and white nature allow for detailed portraits like these to take on the initial appearance of a photograph, which as the viewer moves closer, transforms into a rendering even more special and awe-inspiring. One last thing I gathered from his social media is that he seems to have shows quite often and has exhibited in many different places around the world, including major cities like New York City and Denmark. Personally, I love to see a charcoal portrait artist having such success as this because at times I can get in my own head about creating in a similar style because these works can be quite simple or maybe considered too quote unquote everyday to stand out in contemporary art. However, Barrios is a driving example of how classical techniques like these can still push boundaries even in modern times.